I'm now actually in Slaidburn Street and outside number 44 Slaidburn Street, which is the home of General Sir Roy Redgrave. Now, you've read Trouble in Porter Street. Do you recognise Slaidburn Street?
Oh, very much so, but thank God it's not quite as smelly as it's depicted in that book.
It is a very curious street because it's a dead end. There are no streets off it. There's a great big wall across the end of the street, so it's very much a world on its own.
It really is, and it makes it such an island, just like a village. Everybody talks to everybody. You've just been talking to a little Pakistani girl. There's a bit of everything in the street. The wall does stop cars going through, but about 2 years ago, we had a robber running from the top who climbed over the wall and dropped down into the street, but he was cut off by a noble citizen further down the street and captured.
Now, Chelsea, when you mention the word Chelsea, you think of style, expense, you think of basically upper middle class streets, and some of the houses here must sell for £500,000 now. But when in the 1930s John Sommerfield was writing about the street, he wrote about it as a working class street with perhaps 3 families in each house.
Yes, I would say it hasn't started being, as you say, until about 10, 12 years ago. Perhaps we were the first almost to move into the street about 1981 when I left the army.
And before that it was a working class street?
Almost working class. Very loyal working class street with up to 2 families in each house, sometimes 3 families. Most of the houses had outside lavatories, and there's one over there, number 46, which I'll show you, which we in fact were able to work on, and that had its outside lavatory until 1987. And these 2 houses, either side of number 44, had outside lavatories and no bathrooms, and they had a boiler, copper boiler. And they were very, very poor, simple people. A lady stopped me in the street and said, please come and put a penny in my gas meter for me because it's run out. I had to explain that pennies and gas meters did. But this was only a few years ago.
And these people would have been renting their houses?
Yes, nearly all of them seemed to rent their houses. 1 or 2 were lucky and they got it. The one opposite was freehold. But he was a businessman, he was a carpenter. He had enough money to do it. But most of them were rented.
So some aspects of John Sommerfield's novel were still evident when you moved in, 20 years ago? Working class street, multi-occupation of houses, people paying rent.
About 100 years before that, 1860 odd, the rent was £4.50 a year for one of these houses. But there was an enormous charge for insurance, £450, which must have been colossal in those days. I don't know how that worked. And all the streets, apart from Slaidburn, were named after Captain Gunter's wife and daughters. There's Edith Grove.
He was the initial developer of the area.
He was the guy who came from Yorkshire, an officer in the Dragoon Guards, and he had some fields. Just lucky, he left these fields and made a fortune, but like all the rest of them.
Now, one of the reasons why those fields would have been valuable is just opposite the end of the street, the open end of the street, was Cremorne Gardens, which was a notable Victorian pleasure garden.
Going right down to the river, and all that's left are the original gates to Cremorne Gardens and a lawn and just down by the little patch down by the river. But people would come and enjoy themselves, and if you picked up a girl and you wanted someone to take her, Slaidburn Street was there, but only a few houses, about 12 each side.
Are you saying Slaidburn was a red light district?
Oh yes, at that time. In about 1870 to about 1890, definitely.
So it was a street with a dubious reputation?
Yes, 3 houses down, underneath the wallpaper, we found some wonderful erotic paintings, which I wish the damn person went and covered them up again. But there was a lot of fun and games down here. And the pub at the end was called Swift's. It's changed hands and names quite a lot since then. But that was a great meeting place. The place where you see those 2 lamps was the shop. And people, the street had its own shop. Across the other side, down there on the right, you'll see the red and blue paint where people celebrated the coronation.
So looking down the street as we are, we see, 50 or 60 3-storey houses. Rather smart, rather elegant, nicely kept, nicely painted. Who lives here now?
Well, you've got an extraordinary mixture. You have some very, very poor people. At least 12 houses were looked after by the Notting Hill Trust. And they are the backbone of the street. They seem to get through whatever. The other people, houses change hands a lot. There are people who all spend a lot of money on them, knocking walls down, building roof terraces. But the planning is being kept under control, and there are no great things on the roofs. My sister just lives first house down there, actually. I've never seen her all my life until I left the army after 50 years. Suddenly found my sister again. But the people in the street, there are ambassadors, there are judges, there are doctors, various professional people, solicitors, extraordinary mixture, retired old soldiers, there's everything.
And any vestige of old working class Chelsea?
Very much so. I could take it to a lot of old ladies, but most of the working class people have now got the message and they've made so much money. Remember, these houses cost far less than 8,000 quid when they probably got them, and they sold them for hundreds of thousands. So they made they've all seen, moved. There are 2 or 3, but mainly women. There are not many. The men that work here are the postmen, the street sweepers, who are all very cheerful bunch and go off early in the morning.
Now, does anybody still rent a house in Slaidburn Street?
Yes, my neighbour, who worked for British Telecom, rents that one there. But not many are rented. 1 or 2 houses, the expensive ones, are empty, and therefore people are trying to, because all over London, people suddenly realise you can make money by renting a house, but they're too... I'd say all those people living in Notting Hill houses are rented. They're like the Red Door one there. They're all rented.
And this must be one of the few streets in such a posh area of central London where children can play cricket.
Yes, it upsets some stuffy old things, but I think it's marvellous. I mean, you can see the dents in my car, the hit by the football, but I still think it's absolutely vital that they should be allowed to.
John Sommerfield, when he...
Down, yeah, your kit with you.
Yes, I've got my kit with me. But John Sommerfield, when he wrote about the street, he did take some liberties. He talks about conflict between railwaymen and market men living in the street.
There were always fights, I was told when I came in, and policemen would only come down the street in pairs until about 1970, 1968. It was a very rough street, very rough, apparently, and they all stood up for themselves.
Did you get anything of any indication that there was a tradition of political radicalism here, or...?
No. If anything, it was very, very conservative. There was no street demonstrations, no nothing. It was very... The Daily Worker, I've never seen it being sold. Although I have a cousin, Corin, who is head of the Workers' Revolutionary Party. He hasn't pushed his stuff down the street yet.
So sort of patriotic, loyal working class community, but people who were tough and would stand up for themselves?
All of them, yeah. They'd all gang up and stay, There's some very, very tough ladies around here. I mean, we've managed to calm them down. I can tell you the noise, this screaming that you said, once had to take them aside, say, look, we all live in this street. Don't you put your rubbish out, please, on a Sunday. Now calm down, And funny enough, some of the real old noisy ones have begun to live in harmony with their neighbours. But there was a time when people really did have things thrown at them.
And how have the old residents of the street taken to newer residents from different cultures, different backgrounds?
I don't know, because they seem to be standing it up very well. You've got Greeks and Belgians and Swiss and Italians and they all somehow seem to get on together. And particularly the foreigners really appreciate the mix in the street. And I don't think the rich people upset the others at all. And they've got a lumpy, because they're the ones who got all the kids that play in the street.
Do you think that Trouble in Porter Street caught anything of the street that it would have been in the 1930s?
Yes, I do. I think so. I think, let alone the awful smells. I think it did. There was a lot of hardship. I mean, I don't know how people managed to live on such tiny incomes. And this awful business of paying the rent on time every day, every week, must have been awful.
And what he describes as the built environment along the street, like the pub at the end, which he calls the Clarendon, was very much a pub.
That was, and the shop, one of these houses was turned into a shop. The Methodist church at the end.
So really, in terms of the topography of what he was writing about, he was fairly faithful.
Yes, 1 or 2 bombs have fallen since the book was written, and which of course knocked down houses. So up here you'll get this house with no windows facing the street, was in fact a bomb fell here, and a bomb fell by the church.
So this rather peculiar building without any windows.
Electricity. It was a power station or something, apparently. It's now being used for various different things.
It's not the most sympathetic of infills, is it?
It's horrible, but we did ask the man. He did have a bright red door. We did ask him to paint it black and white, which he did do. Everybody, when I came, there were no flowers in the street. No, in every house, at least every third house is tried. You look down that pavement there, you can see everybody's put things on. When we first started, they were being stolen every night by drunks from the thing, but that's calmed down, and it's become much more colourful. And it's not just the rich people; it's everybody who wants flowers puts a pot out. It looks very nice. The council planted 1 or 2 trees, but cars bump into them, and they'll never flourish, I don't think.
But you clearly enjoy living in Slaidburn Street.
I don't like living in London all that much, but I'd become a cabbage if I lived out in the country all the time. So, but it is a useful place. There are buses in all directions. There's a lot to. As long as you've got fire in your belly, I think London's a good place to be.
But why did you choose to live here?
Because I just left the army. I'd been living in 2 of the most fantastic houses available to British civil servants. One was in Berlin, where I was a British commander, and one in Hong Kong, where they had the most fantastic house built for me on a peak. I left, and we had no house at all. We never had a house. And with what one's gratuity was just enough to buy the rather cheap houses in Slaidburn Street. And I'm so glad my wife, when I left the army, she said, I didn't marry you to give you lunch every day. I'm going to get a job. And she got a job as an estate agent. And the first thing she came up with is this house in the street.
Inside the houses, how big are they?
They're 13 feet across and 17 or 20 feet long, the whole thing. And they have a little tiny yard at the back, microscopic, where the loo was. And most people have filled it in and made a big room downstairs. So there's 2 rooms on each floor, a big room and a small room on a landing at the back. There is room for 3 families, sort of crammed up, and it's been awful.
It would have been a tight fit, wouldn't it?
Those are new, those 2 houses there. They were built a year ago, and they're tiny, they're awful.
So what was there before?
That was continue the flat roof of the pub on the corner. The pub on the corner came as far as here where that red car is. Hello. Very well, thank you. Hi.
And do you remember the pub when it was a local pub? Because I don't know what it is now. It's not even a pub at all, is it? What is it, a restaurant?
Tiger Lilies, which is a peculiar way of, you help yourself to raw food and they pour it into a wok and they heat it up for you. It's not your age group or mine quite, but people do love it. But this was all billiard rooms, and the result was they were having dances in there, and the roof is only half an inch thick, and all these people were getting blown to smithereens by the noise. But so we're very happy it's become a restaurant.
But you remember it when it was a local pub?
I remember when I first came, it was still a local pub, yes, called Swift's.
Friendly?
Yes, I mean, I didn't go into pubs enough. I don't know why.
But the opening scene in Trouble in Porter Street is somebody getting chucked out of the pub and talking about a fight in the pub. And
oh, that was typical here, but not when I don't think in 1980 that much. But there was always a crowd in the street, and all the wretched drug pushers in their brown, bronze Rolls Royces with tinted glass, handing out things through the windows, till you. The whole street rose up together to complain, and we got the license taken away. But one reader, I got them all to ring up the councillors. And every time there was a row in the middle of the night, and in that way it calmed down. The police took more notice. But you're quite right. Now you remind me, we had terrible trouble outside that pub, and we got a street petition going, and everybody signed it. It was much going back to your book in a way, same idea. It worked very well. We threatened. It was in the local papers to ring up every councillor on the local council. If we were being disturbed at midnight, then we'd ring them as well. That produced a marvellous.
So the residents of Slaidburn Street got together in real life, not to get their rents reduced, but to get a noisy pub licence revoked.
About 1987 and 88, yeah, very much so.
But of course, without the involvement of the Communist Party.
Without any help from any political party. Just a lot of. Anyway, there you are. This is the only thing I can show you. This building was new. Number 60 was flat.
Is this a bomb site as well?
That's the door, the white one there at the back. It's the back end of the massage parlour. You'll never see anybody come out of the front door, but that's where they pop out from. And you get these big Rolls Royces waiting here with their chauffeurs, waiting to get these chaps coming.
So the massage parlour is a continuation of the early history of the street as a brothel street?
Yeah, in a way. But you must identify that massage parlours aren't necessarily brothels now. They're for it's a sort of form of upmarket physiotherapy, isn't it?
And then at the end we have the King's Road?
You have the King's Road, you have a fish and chip shop on the left, and in the time that book was written, the fish and chip shop was at the corner where the laundry is. The fish and chip shop was there, and many of the residents in the street still remember the 1939 when the fish and chip shop was where those plate glass windows are. And Blantyre Road went straight on down, and all that's been built since 1950. So there you are,
Slaidburn Street.
Slaidburn Street.